Hello everybody, welcome to another video. This one is being recorded live on my stream, so everyone in Twitch chat, say hello to YouTube. Today we are going to be looking at the KARDS September 2022 balance patch. It was just announced earlier today. Welcome Daniel Plainview. So, the first card up, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, is critical damage, which, as I'm sure we are all aware, the current version reads, enemy units get, when this unit receives damage, pin it. They are changing it to a 1 credit card. Deal 1 damage to a unit. If it does not have any adjacent units, deal 2 damage to it instead. So, obviously, this destroys the combo, the super duper combo, 2+2, SS plus CD, whatever you want to call it. That combo is absolutely dead. What I will say about the new version of the card is, I think it very clearly sucks. I think it does not take a lot to figure out that this card is terrible. Because, first of all, you already have Desert Rats in Britain, so you have a 1 credit, deal 1 damage, pin a unit. This is 1 credit, deal 1 damage, sometimes it deals 2 damage. Also compare this to Through the Breach, which is deal 2 to the back line, 1 to the front line. It's significantly worse than that because units in the front line usually have 1 health, like Cavalry Regiment, Bicycle Regiment, and like the exceptions would be like Beef, but if Beef is in the front line it's because there's another unit there, so you can't deal 2 to it. This card is just terrible unless there's a way to make your unit or your orders cost 0 again. Like with Old Pioneer, your orders could cost 0, and then you would just throw in all of the 1 cost British orders, because you could draw for free with Crusader. One interesting thing about this card is it is any unit. And there's not actually a lot of cards in this game which are deal damage to any unit. Desert Rat is enemy units. Through the Breach. Actually, Through the Breach is any unit as well. That's interesting. Also Tactical Strike. Actually, never mind. I take that back. A lot more cards in this game are deal damage to any unit than I previously thought. Yeah, so this card just sucks. Yeah, the combo is gone. And I will actually, they released a dev blog. I'm curious what they say about this card here. Yeah, basically nothing. We can move on to the second card, Supply Shortage. Everybody knows this card. This card should never have released at 2 credits. Just plain and simple. I mean, I think they wanted to shake up the meta, because it was a very aggressive meta, and it had been a very aggressive meta for a long time, and they were releasing 1 card every 2 weeks, so they wanted to make sure that 1 card had an impact. So I understand the desire to put this out at 2 credits, just to put aggro on the back foot. I think the critical damage was an oversight. I don't think that ever intended to be released. So could this card continue at 2 credits? It could. Would it be one of the best cards in the game still at 2 credits? Yes, it would. Would it see play at 2 credits? Yes, it would. I think we are all excited to see less of Supply Shortage, even without the combo. And nerfing it to 3k, I don't think it will kill the card. It will make it less popular for sure, less strong for sure, but I think this card will see play, if not now, in the future. It's just a really strong effect, if combined with like pin effects. And obviously you don't have like permanently pinned everything, but like combined with like Shelly Numanti, I think this is still perfectly fine. Yeah, not a whole lot else to say about this. I'm glad they didn't like change the effect. Like they could have made it deal 1 damage at the end of the enemy's turn, so they still get a turn to attack with it or something like that. I think this is still fine because you can still do like Pioneer and to play it on turn 2. You can play like Honey on 2, this on 3. I don't think it's a huge difference. Yeah, you still have like a couple of board wipes. Moving on to card 3. This is Raph Lightning. It's going from 5 health to 4 health. I could try to find it, like try to pull it up if I really wanted to. I made this suggestion in like 2020, I think. Like easily 2 years ago. Over 2 years ago, I made this suggestion. I had been playing competitive for a short period of time. Air wasn't super popular anymore. But Raph Lightning was just like one of the strongest guides in the game. And I pretty much said that. I was like, Raph Lightning's one of the strongest guides in the game. It should have slightly less health. Like the most comparable would be Panzer IV, which is the 6-cost 5/5 retreater unit tank. But there's some pretty major differences. One, tank is worse than plane, especially in Britain. Well, fighter is worse than tank. Or tank is worse than fighter, sorry, in Britain. 2, the difference between 5 credits and 6 credits is a lot. 3, Panzer IV has to retreat a unit, so if you play it on an empty... If your opponent has no units, you have to retreat your own unit, which sometimes is a good thing, usually is a bad thing, if you're going for tempo. Yeah, so this 4 health, obviously it hits air a little bit. Not a ton. It brings Raph into range of Burning Sky and 52k, so that's neat. Just, there's so many things in this game that deal 4 damage instead of 5. Like it's into tactical strike range now. It can be killed by Hellcat. It's another like common piece of 4 damage removal. So yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of this change. As we will see, this is essentially the only nerf to air. I thought air could have been hit a little harder. I think air is going to go back to being the number 1 deck on ladder. I don't think it's going to be the number 1 deck, or at least not the number 1 in uncontested deck in tournaments. Just because I think, like, with the SSCD combo gone, I think you're going to see a lot more variety come back into the meta, and I think people have learned to adapt to air to some extent. So yeah, air is still going to be really strong, but this is a slight adjustment to them. So yeah, not a whole lot about that in the dev blog either. Now we go on to, so if you've been paying attention to how they're formatting the order of these, so they did Britain card nerf, Britain card nerf, Britain card nerf, and Mare Nostrum, which has been changed from 2 credits to 1 credit, but the effect has been changed to when this unit, combat damage dealt by this unit gives equal defense to your HQ, to when this unit attacks your HQ gains defense equal to its damage. So, very big change here. Essentially what it means is it does not heal when the opponent attacks into it. So if you get a Panther G with Mare Nostrum on it to the front line, and your opponent's playing like Jagro, if they throw like 6 units into your Panther G to kill it, you no longer heal for 36. You just don't heal at all. Like, you'll heal the 6 or 7, I guess, when you attack with it, but not on the defense. Also means you can't throw Mare Nostrum on a big guard and let your opponent attack into it. So this is intended as a nerf. If you read the dev blog, it says, however, healing a Mare is very stable. With the new version, the affected unit can only heal when your HQ on your turn. This is intended as a nerf. It also shows up with the British card nerfs. This is fully intended as a nerf. I'm going to say it right now, I don't think this is a nerf. I think this is a buff. Like, yes, there are situations where the card will be worsened. I am not saying this card is just going to be better all the time. Obviously, it's going to be worse in certain situations. I think the number of situations this card is going to be better in outweighs the number of situations it's going to be worse in, and I think the number of decks that will now run or consider running Mare Nostrum, because it goes down to 1 credit, is much higher than the number of decks that would consider not running it. Like, I don't think any deck would ever not run it. I think maybe it weakens Britain a little, like Britain, Italy control a little bit. That's not really been a popular deck whatsoever, but they were really the main ones taking advantage of playing Mare Nostrum on like a big guard and then passing. Like, if you actually pay a ton of attention to Italy control games, the number of times a Mare Nostrum unit is attacked into is very, very low. Like, you usually play Mare Nostrum, attack, it heals, and then your opponent uses an order to remove it. Like, the games where they attack into it and heal, you're going to win anyways without the additional healing. And obviously you could argue that, well, they might attack it. There are situations where they could attack into it and previously didn't because they didn't want you to heal, but now they will. However, if aggro's attacking into your unit, it doesn't really matter that you're not healing because, like, instead of dealing 5 damage to your HQ, and then you kill the unit on your turn and heal an additional 5, they're instead now going to attack into this unit. You don't heal 5, but they don't deal 5, and also you now gain the credits on your turn that are not spent attacking. Like, I feel like the times where aggro attacks into the Mare Nostrum unit to stop you from healing on the next turn, it's usually going to be a mistake, which helps the control deck. So yeah, I think this is a buff. I think German Italy was not too strong, but I think it had a problematic element to it with Mare Nostrum. However, I think this is absolutely the wrong direction to go in. I think the problem with German Italy and Mare Nostrum is the cards like Panther G, the Tiger IEs, the King Tigers. It's the untargetable units that you could get Mare Nostrum on, and then it prevents your opponent from removing them with orders. So, what I want to see is the Panther G, Tiger IE, King Tiger. Make it both players cannot play orders on those units. Or with King Tiger, both players, like, orders cannot be played in your support line while King Tiger is on the board. It does not make sense to me why it's fine for you to play Bolster or Counter-Offensive or Mare Nostrum on a Panther G. Like, all of those have been very, very problematic combos in the last, 2 years of Cards Competitive, and in all cases, the order was nerfed and Panther G was not touched. So, yeah, I could rant about this for hours, but we're going to move on to the buffs. Welsh Guards has gone from 2 credits to 1 credit, and then its health has gone from 3 health to 2 health. So, 1 credit, 1/2 guard infantry with an op cost. I don't know why this card has an op cost. This card could be 0 op, and I think it would still be bad. Give target +1 defense. So this can give your HQ +1 defense. If you have a unit on the board, it can give that +1 defense. If you want to give an opponent or an opponent's unit +1 defense, you could theoretically do that. This card sucks. It's not going to see any more play. I mean, I guess it's a buff, kind of. The reduction on health on a guard is not great, and I don't think, I don't know. I guess it's a small buff, but it's so inconsequential and the card is so terrible. We're just gonna move straight on. Gurkha Rifles, another buff coming to underplayed British cards. It loses Fury for guard, and instead of deployment gain attack for each order you've given this turn, it's a passive effect, gains +1 attack anytime you give an order. I don't think this card is good. So even if you get this card, you play this and then you play 3 orders, and you get it up to a 4/4 guard, it's still, only really worth 3 credits, so you're spending, 2 credits on a 3-credit card that also requires you to play 3 orders, and you're only going to do that if you're getting compensation for them, which requires a Crusader. So if you you have to play this on 2 and then Crusader on 3 and then play 3 orders on 4. Except I feel if you're playing against aggro, they will have killed Gurkha Rifles way before it gains attack. So I think this card sucks. It's better than it used to be. There wasn't really any wombo combos you could pull off with Gurkha Rifles before. It's really slow infantry. So, marginally better. I could see a world where this could even potentially see play in the future. But it is not the world we currently live in. I think this card is pretty bad. Then we move on to the third crappy 2-cost British infantry buff. The Royal Scots was formerly enemy random effect, always choose this unit while it's on the battlefield to if in hand or on the battlefield, random effects always choose this unit. So what this means is if it's on the battlefield and your opponent triggers an Akita, or they trigger a Death from Above, or they trigger a B-17, or if it's at full health and they trigger an Avenger, it will always hit Royal Scots. And then the new effect means that also when it's in your hand and your opponent plays discard, they will always discard Royal Scots instead of your other cards. So this card really sucks. I mean, I guess maybe if you've seen a ton of discard, you run this as like a protection for your card draw, but at that point, why wouldn't you just run additional card draw instead of this? Like, what would you rather have? 2 Lend-Leases in hand, and they discard one of them, or you have a Lend-Lease and Royal Scots in hand, and they discard Royal Scots? So, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a buff, but this card still sucks. Now we get to another crappy British infantry buff. First Air Landing Brigade, formerly units attacked by this unit must retreat if they survive, which is a pretty bad effect. Like, I think it might actually be a negative effect. And it has been changed to deployment, retreat a unit in the front line. So this could be friendly or enemy. And it must retreat a unit in the front line. So if you have the front line and you play this card, you have to retreat your own unit. And then the text, if it is empty, get blitz. So this triggers after the retreat. So this means if your opponent has 1 unit in the front line and you retreat it, this gets blitz. If you have 1 unit in the front line and you retreat it, this gets blitz. If you play this, there is no units on the front line, it does not retreat anything, it will still get blitz. If there is 2 units in the front line, it retreats 1 of them, it will not get blitz. So, for example, if Jagro plays cavalry, pulls a beef, you cannot retreat the beef, or you can't retreat the cavalry, kill the beef. It won't work. So, is this a buff? Yes, this is a ludicrously massive buff. Is this playable in current British decks? I'm not sure. Will this be playable in the future? Yes, this card is incredibly strong. They've just given Britain another ridiculously strong elite. They took one of the, like, handful of bad British elites and made it insane. I think this card's going to be C-play. You could even potentially run it in air, because air almost never has units in the front line. So the odds that you retreat a unit, and like air has ways of controlling things, so like if the front line's empty, getting a 3/5 to the front line to protect your support line's pretty good. And if it's not empty, retreating and moving up, or like you can use your planes to kill it down to 1 unit, then retreat and move up. Like, I'm not saying this will be run in air. I'm saying you could run this in air, and the fact that this very clearly control-oriented card could potentially be run in air is a sign of how ludicrously strong this is. I think you will run this in almost every British control deck. The question is British control going to be played now that the combo's gone? Now we move on to the 95th Rifles. We are finally done buffing British cards. This has gone from a 5-cost 7/5, deal 1 damage to your own HQ. This card is hilariously terrible. This is a card that, like, you're kind of forced to play when you play the tutorial, and then you never play it again and never see it played again, because it is so hilariously bad. I mean, I guess you might see it in draft. Like, it's a large unit in draft, and the downside isn't awful. It's just, like, there's so many better options. It has been changed to a 2-credit, 2/2 infantry, still 1-op. Deployment, deal 1 damage to a unit in your HQ. This can target friendly or enemy. So, obviously, this fits into self-damage. If you play a recon on 1, you can ping your recon on 2, you draw off the recon, you deal damage to your HQ, and you get another unit on board. This isn't going to be like a 4-of in self-damage. Obviously not. I think it's still kind of slow. It's an infantry with op cost. The fact that it can hit enemy units, it's sort of like a Nebelwerfer. And Nebelwerfer saw a lot of play, like, several years ago. Yeah, it is very slow. I think you could consider running, like, 1 or 2 of these in the current self-damage list. Like, it might be better than T80. But yeah, that's... So, then, like... I think you might run 1 or 2 copies of this in an existing deck, and the problem is if that existing deck ever goes away, either it's nerfed or the meta changes to the point where it's bad. I think this card is pretty bad. Like, I don't think you would run this in Soviet control. Like, you would just run 2 drops that heal you or end sickles. You wouldn't run a 2-drop that acts like half a sickle. Then we have the Eshak change. It basically loses an attack, but also loses an op cost. This is just a really weird change to me. I guess it's the idea is you're more likely to run the new Eshak in a Soviet Blood Red Sky deck. The 2 op cost is like a pretty negative effect. I actually think this is probably a net nerf, because obviously no one runs Eshak on its own. Would you run a 2-credit 2/2 1-op cost fighter in a Blood Red Sky deck? I don't really. Honestly, like, maybe if you're running exclusively British, like if you're running basically every single British fighter, or British plane I should say, but like, you can't rely on Blood Red Sky as your only win condition. Like, it's just not that powerful. Like, obviously it's ridiculously powerful, but it's not win the game as soon as you play it powerful, and you're just not going to find it that often. So I don't think Eshak, like, is really going to be the deciding factor. The important thing about this is Chaika. So Chaika now spawns the 2/2 1-op plane instead of the 3/2 2-op plane, and I think that's actually worse. The main reason you run Chaika these days is as anti-Brit air tech. So basically it's just a fighter that spawns a fighter. It slows down bombers a ton, it saves all of your other units from these bomber attacks. And the 3/2 is way better into Brit air than a 2/2 1-op cost, because the unit's almost never going to attack. Like, Brit air is never going to kill your Chaika and then pass. That's just not going to happen. They're going to be killing Eshak the turn it comes out. And if they're killing Eshak the turn it comes out, you want it to have higher attack. Simple as that. And even if it comes out, you want it usually to have the 3 attack, because it kills gladiators, it kills swordfishes. Yeah, I think this is actually like a net nerf intended as a buff. Similar to how Marino is a intended nerf, which actually is a buff. This is kind of the opposite. Then we have OT-34. It loses smokescreen, but it's now 3 cost cheaper to deploy and only loses 1+1 stats for that. I think this card sucks. To be honest, I'm happy they made this change. Basically, there was that one deck we saw, I think, Cappuccino bring to an OCC once, where you played OT, and then, because it had smokescreen, you hoped your opponent couldn't remove it, and then the next turn you would buff it a ton, and OTK your opponent with Ura. I mean, it's not that that deck was powerful, but it's more of the fact that the only reason this card saw play is because you were using smokescreen to set up an OTK that your opponent might not be able to interact with. So, lowering its cost also brings it potentially into like a tank deck. The problem is it still has 2 op cost, so bolster is the only thing you're gonna be playing with this, and bolster Soviets is not really a thing. So maybe in the future, if like Soviet tank synergies get really good, maybe, but yeah, overall I think it's kind of a nerf because it takes it out of the only playable deck. But it's a nerf that I'm happy with, because maybe it sees play in the future. Let's move on, because we have a lot of more bad cards to go through. Tomahawk, it now counts units you add as well as deploy. So infantries you add get +1/+1. Where does this apply to? So it applies to the 1/1 infantries summoned by Armor Train, and that huge infantry that summons a light infantry every turn. I don't think that's really an applicable situation, either of them. It applies off of the Machines of War, so like maybe you play Tomahawk in like a Machines of War deck because it buffs the big infantry and then it also buffs the infantry it spawns, but I feel like you would just rather run a better card. Where the biggest thing this applies to is No Surrender, the summon for 1/1s with Blitz. The problem is, Tomahawk is difficult to stick, and if it is sticking, it's almost certainly going to be in the support line, which means no surrender is only summoning 3, so you're like already playing a card which is usually just going to die immediately to weaken the strength of another card that it buffs in a not so meaningful way. I don't think it's going to be good enough for tokens. Yeah, maybe if it was a 2/4, maybe, but even then I think its card is just really bad. The other niche effect is, like, I guess if you do Ural Factories or Red Banner into a infantry, but again, this card sucks. I mean, it's nice that it got a buff, but it's just so awful. I don't think you'll ever run this. Speaking of cards which are so awful you'll never run, the SU-85, it has now gone from 2 op cost to 1 op cost. I mean, it's still a 3 health, 4 cost tank that does absolutely nothing the turn you play it. This card is never going to be run unless the reduce the cost of your tank's deck gets really, really good. Somehow, maybe you would run this if, like, you could consistently play this as a 2-drop. Maybe? I feel like you'd still rather just run SU as a 1-drop. Next, Zippo. So Zippo goes from 4 cost to 3 cost. However, it goes from 3 attack to 2 attack. However, its effect goes from +3 attack against infantry and HQs to +4 attack against infantry and HQs. So, there is a card in the game, an American tank, called the Stewart, which is a 3 cost 2/4 tank as well. It has +4 attack against infantry as well. The difference is it has 1 op and does not have the +4 attack against enemy HQs. I really wish they would have changed this to be something else. Like, this card is virtually identical to the Stewart. Also, I thought Zippo, like, obviously it's a buff, but, I mean, I thought they were both okay. Like, I picked this in draft every now and then. And I mean, that's all it's going to be. It's a draft card. Like, if you really wanted to run a Zippo-like card in ranked, it would be the Stewart, because it has 1 op cost, and 2 op cost on a cheap drop is just so unusable. Yeah, I just wish they had gone in a completely different direction, because it feels like we just have 2 nearly identical cards, both of which suck. Then we have Suppression. It goes from 2 cost. All enemy units in the support line have -3 attack until the start of your next turn, to 1 cost. All enemy units have -3 attack this turn. So, the difference, obviously it costs 1 less, but the big difference is all enemy units, so it includes units in the front line. However, it's this turn, which means they gain all of their attack back on the start of their turn, whereas the old Suppression, it kept the debuff until the start of your next turn. So, old Suppression, like if you're playing against an artillery deck or an air deck that has all the units in the support line, you can play Suppression. It's basically just 2 credits your opponent can't attack next turn. New Suppression does not function in that way anymore. However, it's all units, so like maybe this could fit into like a really strange Heinz deck where you throw out like a Suppression on the turn you're doing like your massive like Greif, Panzeraf, Nakshub dump your entire hand worth of tanks. You throw in a 1 credit Suppression in there so that you don't lose any tanks while trading, because I know that's basically the only German deck that is going to be able to trade a lot and also want to not lose health while trading a lot. Maybe, but I also like Heinz. You just fit in so many better cards in Heinz. Like, this is never going to make a competitive cut in Heinz unless... Yeah, no, just end of sentence. This card's a whatever change. Speaking of whatever changes, the Stug 3G goes from 3/3 to 3/4. However, the ignores heavy armor effect just... I mean, like, what is this gonna kill? Like, this basically exclusively kills the Semivante, the 3 cost, 3/3 heavy armor 1 Italian tank, and the Dauntless, the 3/3 heavy armor 1 American bomber. And those cards both see about as much play as Stug 3G, which is to say absolutely no play. I mean, a 3 cost, 3/4, 1 op tank, German tank, could see play in like a beginner's deck, in like a very budget Heinz deck. The problem is you already have, let me look up what it's called. You have the Stug. I think it's a Stug. No, yeah, the Stug G Scherzen. So the Scherzen is also a, well, it's a limited, I guess. It's a 3-cost, 3/4 German tank, pincer, heavy armor 1. That effect is just so much better. Like, infinitely better than this effect. And that card does not get that, like, at least the Scherzen has seen some play, but it has not seen any real competitive play in a very long time. And it is miles better than Stug 3G. So this card is another whatever change. It's like a small buff to the otherwise garbage card. This one's a weird one. Jade Division's getting changed. It now triggers off of any Japanese card instead of Japanese units. So there's a few wombo combos in there. If you're running like Reorganize or Imperial Decrees, you can play this and buff it a ton the turn you play it. And it now, instead of gaining Fury at 10 attack, it gains Guard at 10 attack. So is this card playable? Absolutely not. This card is still atrocious. Obviously it's a net buff. I guess Jade Division you could have theoretically throw into like a Feigned Retreat deck. So you play Jade Division after Feigned Retreat, and then you start spamming a ton of little guys to buff this. However, like, it's so slow. It needs to be on the board 2 whole turns before it can attack, and if your opponent can't kill this in 2 turns, and also you're spamming other units, you're probably just gonna win because of the other units. Like, you don't need Jade Division. And that's sort of true with the same effect. Like, you're gonna play this, and your opponent's gonna bounce it if it ever gets close to having Guard. And also, they might just bounce it anyways the turn you play it. It's a 5-cost 6/6. Like, for reference, there's a 5-cost 4/7 Guard immediately, and that's miles better than this, and that sees 0 play because aggro can remove it too easily. Maybe this could see play if red has Guard, loses Guard if attack is 10 or more. And at least that one would be interesting, because it's like a 5-cost 6/6 Guard. I mean, that's not even like great stats. Maybe if they made like a 6/7 Guard for 5. And then it's only a Guard for as long as you aren't playing more Japanese units. Yeah. I'm not sure I would call it a bad change. I think it's an interesting direction to take the card in. They just needed to change way more. This card's still garbage, and you are very sad if you open it in a pack. Now we move on to the buffs to the minor nations. Mediterranean Raid goes from can only be played if you control more units than the enemy, deal 4 damage to a unit, to deal 2 damage to a unit if you control more enemies than the unit, deal 4 damage. So obviously this is just a straight up buff instead of being unplayable. If you have less units, it only deal 2 damage. The question is this good? I don't think so. If you play in an aggressive deck, and obviously this is geared towards being in an aggressive deck, why wouldn't you just run, like, Tactical Strike? Like, obviously Tactical Strike's a German card, but, yeah. This card just is... I mean, it's way better in draft, it's way better for beginners who want Italian ally and need a bit of removal. But it's never going to see competitive play. Then we go on to the Char. This card's insane. Like, this card is absolutely insane. I have no idea why this was buffed. Like, the 6-cost 4/4 version was mediocre. I'm not saying that card was insane. I think it was decent. The problem is you would just never... Like, it's too expensive for Mobilize, and there's not really a French mid-range deck. However, like, the Char is already powerful enough to single-handedly win games in the old version. The new version costs 1 less, and it goes from 4/4 to 3/5. 3/5 is a better stat line, so they buffed its cost and also gave it a better stat line. This card's actually insane. Also, the Heavy Armor 2 5 health, it's essentially impossible to kill this without damaging it first, unless you're using an order, and it brought itself out of Lion for a Day range the turn you play it. It brought itself out of tactical strike range the turn you play it. Like, this card's absolutely insane. The problem is you need to play it in a French mid-range deck, and French mid-range sucks. However, it's getting a lot of tools. Rima and Char are some of the best mid-range decks or mid-range cards in the game right now. The problem is they need something to support them. Neither of them do anything on play. Like, I guess Rima is a guard, but neither of them affect the board on play. And we've seen expensive, like, mid-range cards that don't affect the board on play be good in the past. Think, M4A2 in Bolster. Think Panther G in Bolster. Like, we've seen, like, Goshiken in German-Japan mid-range. We've seen, like, powerful 5-cost cards be able to be run in mid-range in the past. However, the meta needs to slow down a little bit for that to be good in the present, just because you need to not die, and you need to be able to afford to play a 5-cost card that does not affect the board without immediately dying or immediately having it be removed or retreated for tempo gain. But yeah, I think this card, maybe German-France mid-range, but I think US-France mid-range would consider running this card. Again, the problem is it has to compete with, like, California, which is, like, similarly a really powerful 5-cost card, and that one does something when you play it. This might be slightly better. We'll have to see. I'm excited to test out with this card. Yeah, like, I think this is a ludicrous change. I think they greatly underestimated how powerful this change is. However, the card saw basically no play, and it's the deck that you would run this in sees no play, so I think it's fine that they would release, like, a ludicrously powerful card for an ally nation. And then we get to the card that they kind of forgot. So if you look at the ordering of these, they did all the nerfs at the beginning, and then they did... Whoops. So they did the nerfs at the beginning, Marino mistakenly included there, and then they went through all of the buffs by nation. So you have all the British buffs, then you have all the Soviet buffs, the one US buff, the couple of German buffs, the one Japan buff, Italy buff, France buff, and then they just threw in U16 at the end. I guess it's because they don't know whether it's a nerf or a buff, so they just threw it in at the end. So on the dev blog it says, this card has been on the list for changes for a long time, as it is the cheapest card that has the potential of draw denial. This new version is now a countermeasure, and the discard ability stays. That is all they say about it. So yeah, this card went from being a cornerstone of handlock to being absolutely garbage. So yeah, it is a nerf. This card is terrible. And I think this is probably killed handlock. You would not run this in handlock. You just would not run this card. I mean, like, maybe there's some countermeasure players out there who are happy that they have a new 1-cost countermeasure, which isn't terrible. Because, like, I don't know, you could run this in a countermeasure deck and it would be fine, but countermeasure is already terrible. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's when the enemy gives an order. This triggers after the order resolves. So if your opponent's hand is only Feigned Retreat, and they play Feigned Retreat, it triggers. Like, Feigned Retreat goes off, and then this discards on an empty hand. This also will trigger, even if their hand is empty. So if the last card in their hand is Feigned Retreat goes off, this discards nothing. If the last card in their hand is Lend-Lease, it does discard one of the cards they play, I suppose. It discards one of the 4 cards they draw. So, yeah, this card is really, really bad. They murdered handlock. And handlock did not need to be nerfed in terms of its power. They basically want to remove being able to draw, deny, and handlock your opponent as a feature, because they think it's uninteractive. I mean, I disagree with that, but it's their game. Fair enough. It's very sad to see my favorite archetype, and the archetype that I really pioneered over the last 2 years, just be taken behind the shed and murdered like this, but such is life. This is very sad to see it go. Everyone hates handlock. I completely disagree with that. Yes, there are people who hate handlock. Obviously, I'm not trying to say your opinion is wrong. There's going to be a lot of people who hate handlock in the same way a lot of people have hated Japan-France resistance. But this feels in the same vein as the Japan-France resistance nerfs, where they take a deck which is seen some success in competitive play, and it's very hard to use, and it's being brought by like a very niche number of players, but there's like general dislike for the deck in the community, so they decide to murder the competitive deck, which is really sad, because the random people who play random discard cards are still gonna run this, and it's still gonna discard you. Like, the random people who frustrate you by playing all of the discard cards in the game in one deck on ladder are still gonna run this card, and it's still gonna discard you, and you're still gonna get annoyed. However, what this does is it murders the competitive deck. People weren't mad at discard because it was competitive, people were mad at discard because they don't like being discarded. So yeah, anyways, I strongly disagree with the direction they're taking in this. I think they, like, even if they wanted to get rid of the effect, I think they could have made it slightly more interesting. With this being nerfed, I also expect it means Wolfpack is probably going to be nerfed in the next patch after this. Very few people probably remember this, but they said that when they nerfed Panther A, which used to be deployment, the enemy does not draw a card next turn. When they nerfed that card, they said in that dev diary that they were going to nerf Wolfpack in the coming future, because they wanted to remove denying draw from the game. And that was like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And then they just never changed Wolfpack. So all of us handlock players were kind of just crossing our fingers, hoping the day would never come where the devs decided to murder the deck. And with this U16 change, I'm assuming that means they have remembered, and they will probably be coming for Wolfpack next patch. I'm kind of sad they didn't change Wolfpack first, because that's like that's the one that, the way they change it would be the cornerstone of where the deck goes, the direction the deck goes, if it could still exist, and also it's the one that's being run outside of handlock specifically. I don't understand why you would nerf the less popular card. But, hey, that is the end of the patch notes. This just brings us back to critical damage. So, all around, how many nerfs were there in this actual patch? There was the U16 nerf, the 2 nerfs to the combo, and the Raph nerf. So, yeah, there was 4 nerfs total, and I guess 16 buffs. The vast majority of the buffs are inconsequential. Some of them are interesting, so I think the buffs it's fine for a patch. I didn't need to see more changes. I'm just sad that there was several inconsequential changes to cards that I would like to see good, and I wish... And the fact that they have these inconsequential changes now means that it's going to be a very, very long time before they make any new changes to these. So the cards that they buffed and still suck are going to suck for a long time. So that's really sad to see, like with Jade Division. Yeah, nerfing Handlock, that came out of nowhere. Small nerf to air. I think another thing to say about the Mary Nostrum going to 1k, the number 1 deck that will like this is Air, because Air ran Mary Nostrum for the buff and the healing. They did not run it for your units being attacked into. More often than not, you play this on a bomber, which can't deal combat damage on, like, while defending anyways. So, yeah, this is actually like a quasi-buff to Air. I say quasi-buff because, personally, I'd already cut my Mary Nostrum, and I would definitely not run 3. Maybe 2 if it's like a very aggressive meta. But, yeah, I think you're definitely going to see a lot of Brit Italy Air decks running the new Mary Nostrum, and I think it's just going to be better in that deck. So, yeah, another... keeping in tradition, you have a very tiny nerf to Air, and then a quasi-buff to Air, which is unintentional. Also, removing this combo, this is the only thing holding Air back, really. So, yeah, Air is new top dog, but I don't think it's going to be uncontested. I think German-Italy is going to be really strong. I think US mid-range is going to come back with a vengeance once combo is removed. Jaguar, I think, is going to be slightly weaker now, because Jaguar's main thing is that it could semi-consistently beat... like, it was like a close matchup into the credit denial deck. Now it's just going to go back to being hammered by Air and German-Italy. So yeah, all around, I mean, the patch did what it needed to do. It removed the combo. But it didn't touch... I think it could have touched a lot more cards. I think they needed to nerf Observer Core. Not because Observer Core is still going to be used, but because Observer Core never should have been released the way it is. The fact that you can play turn 2 Southern, or turn 2 in Hour of Need, or turn 2 Daylight Bombing is stupid. You just should not be able to do that. And, like, next time Britain gets a strong combo, it's just going to go back to people running the double Daylight, double Southern play and shelling with Observer Cores. Like, that deck's probably going to be gone now, but it's going to be back next time they buff Britain. So, yeah, I think they could have nerfed more cards. I think they could have nerfed better cards. Again, I think they should have changed the Panther G untargetable effect. But, yeah, all around, okay patch. I just really hope we don't have to wait another 2 months for the next one. Because at the rate of new cards coming in, Air really needs to go. Just plain and simple. Air is not like obliterated from the game, needs to go, but like it's been the best deck, or one of the 3 best decks in the game for like 2 years, and right now it's controlling the meta so much, because German-Italy control is good. However, the only reason it's the only control deck being run these days is because it's good into air. Like, Soviet control could compete with German control. It can compete with jade, or it can compete with self-damage and mid-range. However, it just cannot beat air whatsoever, which is why no one plays Soviet control. Same is true about Britain control. Like, there's so many decks which are exclusively not seen play because of air, and if they're not going to patch for another 2 months, this means World Championships is going to be played on this patch. Which means, yeah, I hope you like seeing every single player bring air in top 128 and qualifiers. Yeah, I'll end the YouTube video there. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment, whatnot. Twitch, stay here.